through the pain. But look at us now, on a Sunday. Have we seen our finest hour? Good times surely will come. All I know is people talk without listening. What I'm saying is life's too short to live in these extremes.
We made it happen. Jimmy was an incredible success. I don't know where he is. I gotta find him. Gosh, I don't. Oh.
Oh yeah, George. Oh, George.
Right
George.
here. Yeah.
We did it, brother.
Yes, we
hey,
did.
Thanks to Dan. You know what? And in the ring with Dan and Benny. Hey, brother, man, hey, he's about the most cat. I just love him to death. I love you. Thanks for having me. Hey, you're the best. I'm telling you, brother. In the ring with
Dan and Benny.
Yeah.
We love you. Thank you so much.
Dan.
Mwah.
Oh yeah.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Dan and Benny in the Ring. I'm Dan Sebastiano, joined as always by the original Long Island Iced Z himself, Benny Scala. Benny, before we start, a special birthday shout out to the handsome one himself, Jimmy Valiant. I heard that was a great party this weekend. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. Yeah, I was just going to say, Dan, we're coming off a mixed bag of wrestling this weekend. We started up on Saturday with SummerSlam, actually, which, at least in my humble opinion, was a head-on collision. But then Sunday was the birthday of our dear friend and sponsor, Jimmy Valiant, and a great time was had by all at Boogie's Wrestling Camp in beautiful, scenic Charlottesville, Virginia.
Absolutely. Also, I'm wearing one of the shirts today. We had a AEW collision this weekend, saw Ricky Steamboat as a special guest referee, and an after event I recommend everyone look up to on YouTube, where FTR and CM Punk gave a special shout out to Dennis Condrey for an anniversary and just a recognition of the Midnight Express, one of the greatest tag teams in history. So I thought that was really nice of them to do that. But Benny, the show tonight, we always talk about our tagline is celebrating wrestling's storied past, but the other half of that tagline is looking forward to wrestling's future. And wrestling's future is really bright with our next guest. So why don't you tell everybody who's joining us today?
Well, Dan, rumor has it that our guest is currently building a 10,000 square foot house in her hometown of Roanoke, Virginia. Now, my guess is that she'll need about 9,800 square feet of it just to display all the wrestling awards and titles she either has won or will win in the future. And speaking of Boogie's Wrestling Camp, like we just said, I can normally see our guest beating people up there on most Sunday afternoons, but what a delightful change just to be able to sit with her and visit and chat. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce the current, I hope I get this right, Wrestling All-Star Promotions Women's Champion and BWC International Champion, The Keeper, Sam Street. Sam, welcome to Dan and Benny in the Ring.
Thank you so much. That was an awesome intro. That was really cool.
It's all true, though.
Fair. I'm not going to dispute it.
There you go.
Title part.
Uh-oh.
Look at that.
There you go, already.
Beautiful.
That's funny. Well, Sam, we always start with the same question, and obviously, your connection to a lot of our past guests is going to get pretty prevalent as the interview goes on. But I want to start with the same question we do with everybody because the answers are always different. They're always interesting. When did the wrestling bug bite you? Who got you interested in wrestling purely from a fan perspective?
My dad. My dad has been a wrestling fan since he was little. And growing up, I knew kind of what it was, but I didn't really have any interest in it. And then one day I was, I think like 11 or 12, and I was just with my dad and wrestling was on the TV. And for the first time it caught my attention. And I remember so distinctly, it was a video package for Kevin Owens versus Sami Zayn. And it was their whole story about how they met and grew up and then started their rivalry and all that. And I just remember the video package played and then the match played, and that was it from there. I was like, I don't know what this is, but I need more of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Well, for those, I'm sorry, a quick expansion for those listening. The Kevin Owens Sami Zayn rivalry, while it goes back to Kevin Steen and Generico and Ring of Honor many years, the idea that Kevin Owens Sami Zayn, and especially they're starting NXT together, is a relatively new grasp in wrestling. So you're have you looked back at some of the older stuff, or have you just been sticking with the new wrestling since you hooked up?
Oh, I love wrestling in general. I've watched old stuff, new stuff. That's just where I got started. And I kind of once I saw that, and I kind of stuck with mainstream for a little bit until I kind of figured out what this wrestling thing was. And then once I started to hear about all these legends, then I went back and started watching stuff. And I think my favorite era of wrestling, besides Triple H NXT, is Monday Nitro. That's a sweet spot for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Sam, when did you decide that you were actually that you wanted to make this your vocation?
Well, that was maybe so I started training back in October. But before that, I was in college. I was a college soccer player, and I started thinking about wanting to do wrestling back when I even started high school. And I was like, I don't know when it'll be, but I have to get into it at some point. And so, I went through high school and then into college playing soccer. And then at one point I was like, I can't keep putting this off. I want to do it now. So stopped playing soccer to pursue a new sport. And it's genuinely the best decision I ever made.
Nice. Well, you mentioned soccer. I mean, you have a great athletic background. You former Division II NCAA goalkeeper. Winning, correct me if I'm wrong, both the NCAA Mountain East Conference and Atlantic Regional Championships.
Yep.
I mean, I looking at that, we've seen transitions with football with players, people like The Rock and Goldberg and Ron Simmons, and then obviously wrestlers, Kurt Angle, among others. I've never seen soccer. I can't imagine soccer and wrestling have much in common, or the discipline of goalkeeping transitioning over. But I can imagine that just the athletic requirements of college athletes greatly helped in learning, becoming a professional wrestler. Am I correct here? Did your athletic background help?
1,000%. And believe it or not, I learned very quickly. There's way more similarities between goalkeeping and professional wrestling than I expected. I think first of all, I always make the joke that, in wrestling, we're known for taking bumps, and goalkeeping is the one position in soccer where you're known for taking bumps.
Right.
You have to down eventually. But I think the main thing is the footwork that's required in soccer translates so perfectly to wrestling, especially because I'm not 6 feet tall. So technical athleticism like footwork translated perfectly for me.
Nice. So Sam, why BWC? I mean, there's a ton of wrestling schools out there. Why did you choose Boogie's Wrestling Camp?
Well, I did the classic. I came home from college and I just Googled wrestling schools near me. And I found some people on Facebook that I had messaged, and I was like, hey, how do I get into, wrestling school and this and that? And one of the guys called me and was like, you need to get up to Boogie's immediately. It's the place to be. You're going to learn so much. And so the next Sunday I went up there and watched, and from the moment you get there and you see all the stuff on the walls and the Hall of Fame and everything, I just knew that that's where I was supposed to be.
It's truly, and I always say, when I post on Facebook, that it's a family there. It's not just a wrestling school. It truly is a family. The minute I walked through the doors there, I felt like I was a part of it. And I imagine you felt quite the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's crazy too how, you hear all the time from different jobs, teams, things like that. Oh, we're a family here. And so I kind of got numb to that saying.
It's a cliche normally, right?
Right.
Yeah. But then I came up there and everybody genuinely embraced me. And anytime I struggle with learning to do something, or I get overcome with the emotions of the sport in general, there's no judgment, and I always come out feeling like a better athlete. And it was funny because the first day I went up there, I kind of got this sign almost that that's where I was supposed to be. The class at Boogie's that I'm in right now is the 31st graduating class, and the number that I played under for most of my soccer career was 31.
Wow.
So instantly, I just knew I'm doing it.
Almost
So
perfect.
you said
Yeah.
your dad was or is a big wrestling fan. What does he think of Jimmy? And like, what did you think of Jimmy the first time you met him?
Oh gosh. So, well, the first time I met Jimmy, he hugged me and he asked me, a little bit about myself. I started telling him, and he was like, just the most welcoming person I've ever met. You can just tell, like, when somebody's got that heart of gold, and he
It's
does.
genuine, yeah.
Yeah. My dad, it's funny because it was actually, I hadn't been training at Boogie's long, and my parents, it was Christmas Eve, and we were all shopping in different places. My parents send me a selfie from the FYE at Valley View Mall, and it was a selfie of my mom and my dad with Boogie and Captain Joe. And I got the photo on my phone, and I genuinely jumped because it just out of nowhere, no context. I just get this selfie with them, and they were like, "He's great. We told him who we were, and he was super welcoming and sweet." So they love him too.
You can't not love Boogie.
Yeah,
Right.
for sure, for sure.
I mean, not just the charisma, but I mean, just had another birthday and still sharp as a tack, pulling stories from 60 years ago, like he's telling you something that happened this weekend.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy. His stories are just, you hang on every word he says. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny. We've talked a lot about to people about their training and their time in the business. I don't think we've ever really asked our guests this. You said it felt right with the numbers lining up, but when did you start to feel like you were getting it?
Very recently. I'm not gonna lie. It's been
Oh,
very.
wow.
I just started training in October. I had my first match ever 4 months ago on my 20th birthday in March. And so, like, I haven't even been working shows that long. And I remember my first show distinctly beforehand. I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but it went great. And then a couple weeks ago, I think it was my first title defense for my WASP Women's Championship. I came back through the curtain and I was like, okay, I think I'm starting to get the hang of this. And ever since then, I've been like gaining momentum. And now I'm kind of to the point to where like I feel really comfortable doing this.
Sam,
Was there anything that you picked up quicker than others?
The footwork came pretty easily for me. And within my first month of training, I had people at Boogie saying to me that I was getting the footwork really easily and that it just looked solid straight off the bat. But like I said, that just translated from my sport.
Sam, there's got to be somebody listening. I'm sure there's going to be at least one or two people, maybe even more, listening that are considering a career in professional wrestling. Tell them why they should choose BWC.
I mean, we touched on it a couple times, but genuinely, I know for a fact there's not a single place in the world like it, and you will not find another place where people are accepting of you no matter where you are at, skill-wise, personally, in your career, in your life. I've never met a more supportive group of people anywhere. I've played on a lot of teams, gone to a variety of schools. I've never found a group of people that are so invested in you improving. And there's never going to be another place like it.
I have to add something too, because I've been there many times since I came here to Virginia a couple of months ago, and I'll usually be there. I'll get there about 10:30 just because I need to get a parking spot,
Mm-hmm.
and usually park right in front of Captain Joe. But at 10:30, there's already wrestlers there in the ring, actually helping clean up camp. And I thought wrestling is very competitive, but I was amazed at how everybody helps everybody else, with the drills. And I mean, it's absolutely amazing how everybody there helps each other out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just coming from like, rigorous sports background, I didn't really expect that. I expected it to just be like very just like straightforward, succeed or don't, but it's quite the opposite. People that, you've never met before want to take the time to break down the drills for you and really help you understand what you're doing and master it rather than just getting it right once.
Right.
It's perfect, honestly.
Well, you talk about, I mean, the no school like it, other than the BWC, founded by our good friend, obviously, Jimmy Valiant. He's been on the show numerous times. We've had so many. I don't think, Benny, I don't think we could count the number of stories we've had from people who have either trained there, worked there, gone through there, or knew Jimmy in some way that didn't have a good thing to say about the BWC. But Sam, you've also spent some time at the School of Morton, and to say Jimmy Valiant and Ricky Morton are absolute legends, I mean, that's like saying Benny wears colorful shirts. I mean, it goes without saying, right, Benny?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I mean, so there's really no disputing either. I was hoping you could talk a little bit, because he was always one of my favorites when I was young. If you could talk a little about Ricky Morton and the influence he had on your career.
Yeah, so I've had the opportunity to meet him twice. The first time I met him was, I think, about 2 months back at the Paul Morton Cup. I was fortunate enough to actually be in that match, and beforehand he came in and he took the time to come around, shake everybody's hand. But then when the match was beforehand, because the actual match for the cup was the last thing on the show, so there were a bunch of matches for that, and I was sitting in the back, and he came and sat next to me and was talking to me through all these matches, and he would break down spots in the match as it was happening, just talking to me, and say things like, how he did this, that was fantastic, how he did this, not as great. And then he would ask me questions about my style and whatnot. And what I noticed about him was that he really takes the time to invest in people and help us understand the little nuances of wrestling that not everybody gets.
Are the two schools similar? I mean, how are they similar and how are they different?
So they're similar in their general, I don't know if this will make sense, but like in their general vibe. You walk into both and you're standing in history, and it's this same feeling of utter privilege that I have to be able to be in both. But they're very different in the same sense, because the rosters are very different. And the general workings of show days, for example, are very different. At SOM, it's very based around the TV aspect. We work towards a camera, we work towards an audience. And behind the ring at SOM, there's not an audience, it's just one-sided. And at BWC, we almost embrace the fact that we're all learning, and it's a 360 effect for us at BWC. So I think there are similarities in the sense of the vibe, but in the operations, I think they're a little bit different.
All right. So, Sam.
Go ahead, Benny. I'm sorry.
You go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say, both Jimmy Valiant with the Valiant Brothers and Ricky Morton with the Rock and Roll Express are just legendary. I mean, two of the greatest tag teams in the history of wrestling. I was wondering if you've noticed, working with either or both of them, I should say, if the tag team background helped with any of the in-ring training, because a lot of you see it, anybody that watches wrestling, just because you're a good wrestler or your way around a ring doesn't mean you can succeed in a tag team setting. It really takes that extra level. And I was wondering if you could kind of expand on whether or not the tag team training and experience that either of them had kind of played into the lessons you learned from them.
100%. And honestly, I don't think I had actually thought about this in this sense, but now that I think about it, 100%. And I think it's two-sided. Number one, the fluidity that a good tag team has to have in order to, number one, isolate an opponent and cut the ring in half, but also be able to tag in and out. The fluidity has to be perfect. And so I think both Jimmy and Ricky have that about them. The no wasted motion idea, the necessity for being aware of what's happening in the ring at all times. But then on the other side, in tag team matches, there are times when you are outside the ring, and they know how to use those moments very wisely in the sense of getting the audience involved. And it also just preparing for what your opponents are going to do by being able to watch them and figure out their strategy. So in the sense of the fluidity and the crowd interaction, it's completely different coming from tag team wrestlers than it is just from singles competitors.
So, Sam, I mentioned earlier you just won the BWC International Championship, and as well as the WASP Women's Championship. But Sam Street is constantly on the highway. Talk about the other promotions you wrestle for, and are there any more titles that you're currently chasing?
So I am always on the lookout for a new title. I wrestle for quite a few other promotions. I have a few that I wrestle for the most. Obviously, BWC, SOM, WASP, where I hold my title. But I also wrestle for Pure Pro Wrestling in Virginia, North Carolina. I wrestle for All-Star Championship Wrestling. And most recently, I made a debut for Ring Wars Carolina. And I happen to know that they have a women's champion, Audrey Allen. And I've won both of my matches so far at Ring Wars. So to say that, I've got my eye on her title is a bit of an understatement.
So you're pretty much all throughout the Mid-Atlantic. I mean, Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia. Have you wrestled in West Virginia?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think those are the 4 that I've been to so far.
Okay.
But yeah, it's an amazing scene because there are areas that feel very new and modern and full of young talent. But then there's also the side of all these promotions that feels very old school Southern wrestling, almost territory like. And so it's such a fun dynamic mixing the two that the Mid-Atlantic has. I love it.
And really coming from Florida, and there's a lot of indie wrestling in Florida. I had no idea as to the amount of indie wrestling around here, and I'm just astounded when me and Hunter go back and forth via Messenger, and every week he'll send me all the posters of all the cards around the area. Just amazing how many good cards there are out there every weekend.
Yeah. It's incredible. And before I got into this, I didn't even know there was wrestling anywhere near here. I would have gone and watched all the time, but I had no idea.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to see good wrestling, you don't have to drive too far.
No, 100%. 100%. It's great.
It's more of a choice of which one you're going to go to out of the ones that are available.
Yeah.
So, Sam, your finishing maneuver is the Dead End, which I love the name of that. That's great. It's your version of the Shining Wizard. And I was actually there when you used it to defeat that nasty Baron Victor Kraut to capture the BWC International Championship.
Yep.
What made you decide on that particular finisher?
Well, I wanted something that I could kind of throw in out of nowhere. I didn't want there to have to be some massive setup for it, because with a finisher, you want to be able to use it whenever you see an opening. But also, I think I led my search for a finisher off of my background in soccer. Obviously, kicks, that type of thing, it comes very naturally to me at this point. And so, through experimenting, through tape study and all this, I actually saw Tegan Knox's Shining Wizard, because the original Shining Wizard, you end flipping over. But with her Shining Wizard, she just goes straight in, and it's almost Claymore-like, but as a knee instead of a kick. And I loved it. And once I tried it, I instantly knew it's what I had to use.
Did the soccer background kind of influence you to want to do more a kick-based offense? Yes,
1,000%. I'm constantly throwing kicks, taking out a leg, hitting a knee. Absolutely. That's where the majority of my power comes from.
Well, you mentioned the Claymore. Obviously, they've Drew McIntyre, current wrestler. You talked about getting into it with Sami Zayn, Kevin Owens. I assume you're a fan of the current product. Outside of Zayn and Owens that you talked about earlier, do you have any current favorite wrestlers?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think at this point I have a general just appreciation for wrestling as a sport that I didn't have before I got into it. But pretty much as long as I can remember, my favorite wrestler ever, any era, has been AJ Styles. The way that he mixes athleticism with style is as close to perfect as I think you can get. Going back further, big Ricky Steamboat fan. I just think that he mixes the fluidity with the style that I love. And I mean, even nowadays, love Rhea Ripley, Becky Lynch, Mercedes, all of them. I love women's wrestling where it's at now because we're able to be athletes.
When I saw you do an arm drag at camp, I thought, like, man, that's like a Ricky Steamboat arm drag. Now it makes sense that because he was the master of the deep arm drag.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he 100%. Once I saw him do an arm drag, it was just decided before I even started training, I'm gonna do arm drags, and I do.
And I was going to ask you, like, did you pattern your style after anybody? But I have to say, after watching you week after week, that your style it's pretty unique.
Yeah, I agree. I think I pick up pieces here and there, but you mentioned not a lot of people get into wrestling from soccer, and I think I've kind of had to find a way to mix the wrestling style that I like with my background in order to maximize my ability. So I've kind of had to come up with like a unique combination of moves.
All right.
I mean, they just recently had, a few months back, the Ricky Steamboat's final match, the last Ride of the Dragon. Actually, funny, one of the preliminary events at that was the Boogie Invitational, which got Jimmy Valiant get a huge reaction. But this is almost 40 years after I'd seen Ricky Steamboat wrestle for the first time, and his arm drags were still gorgeous. I mean, just like I always joke that Ricky Morton still has the best mullet in the business. I mean, it's been decades, and Ricky Steamboat still has the best arm drag I've ever seen.
100%. It's beautiful. And I want my arm drag to get to Ricky Steamboat level. I would love for that to happen.
So is it possible you'll incorporate the Pele kick from AJ Styles into your repertoire?
I could absolutely see that happening. That is something that I would love to learn how to do. Pele is, I'm going to say, the greatest soccer player of all.
Pele's the god of soccer.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember as a kid watching him at the New York Generals.
Yeah, he's incredible. So it literally is a move that mixes both. So that would be incredible.
So many young wrestlers can do it in the ring, but I think the hardest thing would be to master a promo, and you seem to have even adapted that very, very quickly. Your promos are intense, but they come across as very sincere. Is that something that you've had to work on, or has it just come natural to you?
Both. I think I'm a long-winded person naturally. I can talk for forever. And even my first day at camp, they were like, okay, cut a promo. And I was able to talk, but there was a certain fine-tuning that had to happen. And I think the reason that my promos come off natural is because I have no idea what I'm going to say until I start saying it. I think the best promos happen when you're just allowed to say what's on your mind.
No argument there. Just in comparison, normally, we write out these questions, and we'll come up with about 15 questions. And when Boogie's on, we've never gotten past question 3. You mentioned long-winded. Boogie's still answering question 3, and is already like an hour into our podcast. But I agree with you. I think sincerity, because that you don't want to sound like you're reading off a script or covering bullet points. You want to sound like you're speaking from the heart.
Yeah. I know the point that I need to get across in things, and whether it's a podcast interview, promo, whatever, I never have any idea what I'm going to say, and it tends to work out. So I just go.
One of the big criticisms of the modern product is the overly scripted promos. That was actually when NXT was still a relatively newer development process. They had like Dusty Rhodes and other people in there working on promo class, which a lot of the old timers thought was kind of, it's just those words together, almost an oxymoron, promo class. And you saw it, Benny. We talked about it. I believe it was 2 years ago now. WrestleMania was in Tampa, and they had a rain delay, and it was about 45 minutes where they couldn't, because it's an open air arena, they couldn't wrestle, and they were cutting to different backstage interviews and segments, and you saw people like Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn and some of these guys that were just bam 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 talking, and then it would cut to someone, some of the younger talent, and it's like, yeah, I wrestle good, and you could tell that without a script, nobody could shoot from the hip that didn't have that older style. Sam, I was wondering if you could kind of expand on that a little bit. Like you said that it has to feel authentic, it has to feel emotional. Who was it, Benny, that said the best wrestler is just you turned up to 11? Like, yep. Is there? Yes, there's a. Go ahead.
It was Cornette, wasn't it? Jim Cornette?
Yeah, there's a. Speaking of good promos, there's a kind of a nature to it. Do you work better from just? If I'm in the back, hey, Sam, you're going to go out there and you got 5 minutes, hype up your match? Or is it, hey, you got 5 minutes, I want you to talk about your opponent, where you are, and do a plug for whatever? Like, did you work from the bullet points better? Is it just go out there and talk? How does that work for you in your mind?
I think for me, if I have to try to memorize a bunch of stuff that I'm going to say, I'm going to be stressed that I'm going to forget it. And the stress is going to make me forget it. And it's going to sound like I'm reading my own thoughts. But, and you mentioned the rain delay. I loved that rain delay so much because it taught me the concept that I understand now about promos. Because you could tell at the time, and you knew because of the rain delay, none of that was planned. And it's no secret to wrestling fans that a lot of promos, like you said, promo class and things like that, a lot of it's written. I think the best promo classes teach you how to just be comfortable talking. And I'm lucky enough to kind of have that naturally. I'm comfortable talking. I know the points that I need to get across. And so if somebody hands me a microphone and they just say, go out there and get X point across, get the point across that, this is why this, or this is the match for that, whatever, I can do it. But I struggle very much when it is, here's exactly what you need to say, because it doesn't sound like me. And I think the basis of a promo is you explaining why you like wrestling in the current scenario you're in. And passion doesn't require it to be written out ahead of time.
That's, Benny, we've seen a few times shared through the years on the page, people with pictures where, in the age of advanced digital photography, with how good cameras are now, you'll see people in the ring cutting a promo and you could see on their arms, like there's little notes written on their forearm, or there's a little sticky on the base of the microphone with some words on it. But it's funny, Benny, you corrected me earlier with Jim Cornette talking about the promos, because Sam, at that, if you noticed that rain delay, it was your Owens and Zayn and Samoa Joe. It was the Ring of Honor the early day, the people that would have trained under the mentality of non-scripted promos that were able to kind of hold their own. And I'm curious, you talk about, because I want you to expand on that. You just said something that really stuck out, where you said it would sound like you're reading your own thoughts. If you were to be put in a situation like an NXT or somewhere, where, hey, Sam, here is exactly what you have to say, and basically they hand you a script, how do you go about presenting that naturally without sounding like you're reading your own thoughts?
So those people that you mentioned, the Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, Samoa Joe, they started in the Ring of Honors, the indie scene, where you do just have to say whatever comes out. You know what I'm saying? That's the kind of promos that you cut. And then they get put into an NXT situation where they have to learn how to recite written material. And it sounds very different to a fan, to a professional. It sounds different. But I think there's value in both. I think that's why there's different presentations of wrestling across companies, different styles of wrestling in general. So there's value to both. But I think learning how to do it when it's written for you is being able to change your cadence. And it's very relevant right now to mention an LA Knight. His cadence, in my opinion, is what makes him so popular. The words that he says and the promos that he cuts, there's nothing overly revolutionary about the words that he
not at all.
Right.
It's the way that he presents the information, the pauses that he takes, the expressions he puts with it, and the emphasis that he puts on certain words in that line of words that makes them matter. You know, anybody can recite words given to them, but I think it makes the best professionals when you can make every single word count.
You know, it's funny, Dan. I was gonna say, despite the fact that I thought SummerSlam was a train wreck, the one thing I liked most of all was LA Knight winning the Battle Royal.
You know, it's funny because if you watch the event, and Sam, I don't know if you watched SummerSlam over the weekend, excuse me, that Battle Royal, Slim Jim, by the way, back for the first time in years, signing a sponsorship with the WWE. So it was nice to see some of the old Macho Man clips. Although, Benny, I don't know if you've seen the new one or not, but they have LA Knight is the new Slim Jim spokesman doing the Macho Man role. So I think that's great. But that Battle Royal was, for all intents and purposes, meaningless. There was no titles on the line. There was no. It was simply bragging rights, and him winning was probably the loudest pop of the night. Just a middle time wasting Battle Royal to get a few people a SummerSlam payday, and people reacted like he just won the title.
Yeah, it was one of the two. I mean, I liked that, and I liked the end of the Cody Brock match, even though I didn't think the match was believable per se. I mean, Cody Rhodes has no business beating Brock Lesnar, but I mean, it was a great match, and I liked the embrace afterwards, and totally unscripted, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought that was great. But LA Knight was the highlight of the night for me.
No, absolutely. Yeah, Sam, going back to your interview, I don't want this to sound like just a standard job interview question, but you have such a bright future. So where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? I mean, I think in this case, it's actually a good question. So realistically, how far do you want to take this?
So let me just say this. I made my professional debut, like I said, a little over 4 months ago. And I'm 20 now. And when I first started training, I had no idea that at 20 I would be sitting here, double champion, working every weekend. I had no idea. So I would almost dare to say I have no idea where I'm going to be in 5 years. But I know that there will be more titles. I will go ahead and say that right now. I will capture many more titles in the next 5 years. And every chance that I get to advance myself, I'm going to take it. I had what a lot of people would consider to be the stereotypical golden opportunity as a college athlete. And I retired from that to take everything that I have and invest it into this sport. So I know it's a commonly used phrase in wrestling nowadays, but I really am all in on this because this is something that I know I'm supposed to be doing. So I don't know exactly how far I'm going, but I'm going to give it everything I have.
Okay, so Sam, I have to ask you this.
Okay.
You seem like you are a very, very nice person, and you're the ultimate baby face so far. But maybe I'm a bad person, but I could easily see you turning heel.
No.
Am I wrong in that?
You know, I get that every single weekend. People say that to me every single time. And ultimately, no. That's not something that I see happening for me. I really don't. There are a lot of people that can play both sides of the ring very well. For me, I think wrestling isn't just something that I do. I have my ethos behind it. And so I'm not just doing it for this purpose. I have a lot of photos that I've posted and shared that other people have shared of me with kids. I think a big problem, I don't want to say a problem in wrestling, but a problem in local wrestling is there's only so many people that parents want their kids looking up to. I come across as a very wholesome, nice girl next door because that's who I am.
Because that's
Right.
Exactly.
I'm not playing a character. It's the cornet, turn it up to 11. This is who I am. I am the All-American, worked my way up to be a college athlete. that is who I am. So I don't think being heel is even possible for me. I really don't.
I think you could do it. I think you might choose not to do it.
You know, I don't think I have the heart to do it. I really.
Okay. So the day you turn heel, I'm going to be there at ringside. Say, I told you so.
You're gonna be waiting a while, but never say never.
You know, it's funny. Obviously, Sam, you're going to be too young to remember this, but in 90, I believe it was 91, Ricky Morton turned heel in the early days of WCW after the Rock and Roll Express had split, you know, different contracts and all. He joined the York Foundation, which was the early days of big brick laptop where the computer analysis could help me become a better wrestler, because you know, back in the 80s and 90s, a floppy disk and an old computer could do anything in the world of fiction. And he went by excuse me, he went by the name Richard Morton.
Richard Morton.
And was a heel, but he kept the same ring gear. He kind of wrestled the same style, and the fans still liked him. And it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, you're heel on paper, but are you really? And I'm thinking too literally, but I could picture that with you somewhere trying, you know, you going to another promotion, them trying to push a heel side. And it's just, I mean, here's this decorated collegiate athlete that's a down to earth, good person. Like, yeah, you're a heel, but are you really? You know, this is like I said, a Shawn Michaels, a heel Sting kind of mentality where it's like, it's just impossible to not still like you anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. But the thing about that is, though, the reason that happens is because you get invested in who the person is. That's what happens when you're not playing a character. You're just who you are in wrestling. And that's the thing with Ricky Morton. He is who he says he is. So, you know, people want to present him as a heel or a face or whatever. He's Ricky Morton. You know, so nobody's like, oh, I'm supposed to boo him. He's just Ricky Morton. So people are going to cheer for him regardless. And I think that's my goal as well. I don't want to be, oh, she's the good guy, she's the bad guy. I want it to be, that's Sam Street. I know who she is. I know what she's done. I like her because of who she is.
You know, now that I think about it, it's kind of important because even though you're going to be in, you know, 4 or 5 different states, conceivably the people who see you wrestle in North or South Carolina could see you wrestle in Tennessee or West Virginia. You do want to be consistent.
Yeah.
It gets confusing otherwise.
I have fans that have come to shows for WASP and Ring Wars and Pure Pro and BWC. They've been all over and they know who I am and they follow my stuff online. And that is another thing that makes it so special, is I am telling my real life story. I show pictures of me when I was a little kid and talking about how I used to dream about this, and then, you know, share my college background and all that. And so I'm able to tell my story through different companies because these fans do get invested, which is very rare at an independent level.
Correct.
It's amazing.
Well, let me have you, I want to kind of keep this going for a little bit. We talked about your wrestlers, your impact, the current product, but you mentioned when I asked about your watching past wrestling, obviously today it's significantly easier than it was when I was younger, or when Benny was younger, and the old reels had to be delivered by horseback carriage, and if the Wells Fargo wagon was late that week, he wasn't watching his wrestling. And you know, I'm curious, when you watch the older tapes or even the current stuff, is there any kind of inspiration? Like, you watch some of the older matches and go, wow, like say a Jerry Lawler or Ricky Steamboat, and go, that works, I want to try something like that. And if you get that, it's part 2 of this question, if you get that, like, hey, I watched an old Jerry Lawler Bill Dundee match and this worked, do you go back to BWC and say, hey, I saw this and this on an old tape, do you think we could try something like that? Or are you still just at the sponge stage of absorbing everything and maybe let people teach you and go from there?
So I've been watching this for years. So I've kind of been able to pick out the eras that I like, the people that I like the best. But I definitely learn from everything. And I think in the sense of using moves and things like that, I absolutely learn what works move-wise. I think watching the old stuff originally, I had this mindset of what works with the crowd. But what I've learned is that crowds now are very different than they used to be. when you watch older stuff, and I learned this when I kind of started watching history rather than current product. If you look at the crowd nowadays, they have shots where you can see the entrance ramp and crowd in front of the ramp. Every single person looking at that entrance ramp isn't looking at the ramp. They're looking at the ramp through their phone because they're recording what's happening as they're watching. In the old stuff, people were looking at what was happening. They were holding signs. The number of signs in crowds have decreased. So I think what I've had to do is learn the moves that are classic and the style that is so effective. But you have to find a way now to get people to put the phone down, which requires some evolving. And I think that's one area that complicates wrestling now. You want to do something that makes people put the phone down. You don't want people to worry about recording what's happening. They just want to see it.
So that leads me to another follow-up question, because we've had a number of female wrestlers from as early as the 60s. We've had Toni Rose, we've had Princess Victoria, who is a WWF Tag Team Champion, Desiree Peterson, same thing. Back in the territory days, if say you were born instead of 2000, I guess 2002 maybe, or 3? Okay, close. You're born in 1963. Could you have seen yourself wrestling in the 70s and 80s in those territories, traveling from territory to territory? And I mean, I think you would have done very well.
So that's difficult to answer. I talk to people like my grandparents and my aunts and things like that, and they tell me about how different it is living in the world now, and then they'll tell me about what life was like when they were little, and it's so mind-blowing to me to think about how different everything was, and the way even like society was in the way that they saw wrestling. So I have no doubt that I, as a person in any era, would have found my way to wrestling. But I think with the style being so different, it's almost hard to imagine, because I likely wouldn't have had the college background in the 60s. That wasn't really a thing that women had. So I would have kind of just had to hop in and hope for the best, but I'm sure I would have found it.
Well, I'm curious, expand on that, actually follow up to that, Benny. Something that we didn't see much of at all back in the 60s and 70s was intergender wrestling. Do you think, I mean, a lot of your style translates so well, men, women, whoever, you're going to literally, no pun intended for a finishing move involving kicks, but you're going to kick their ass. Do you think, especially some of the stories that have come from the struggles women had, would you have been okay in an era where you were, in most cards, just kind of an attraction and women's wrestling wasn't a real dedicated, serious thing in most parts of the country?
I have to say yes. I think so, because at that time, it wasn't just an attraction. It was something, I think male fans during that time saw it as an attraction. But for the women that were watching, it was, this is my opportunity to see a woman doing something. So I think I would have been okay with it. But also, if you're put in an attraction spot, but you keep doing better than expected, they have no choice but to stop making you just an attraction.
Yeah, I could see that. You would work towards bumping the card to the next level the way like a Lalani Kai or somebody did at the time.
100%. Yeah, that's kind of like, when I think about that and I put myself in that mindset, that's kind of what I see happening. I see myself being one of those people that was like, yeah, but like, let me fight. You know what I'm saying? Like, I wouldn't just, I would be happy with any opportunity as I am now, but at the same time, it's like, let's advance things a little bit. I see that for me.
It's funny because
go ahead, Benny.
You mentioned your grandparents, and I don't know how old they are, but I mean, I go back a little ways, even though, it's hard to tell. But, when I first discovered wrestling, I was 13, which was in 1968. And you literally, like, when you went to school and talked about wrestling, there were very few kids who really, it was kind of a secret society. You had to seek out the kids who liked wrestling, and
Yeah.
then you'd hang out with them. And then when you saw one of the jocks come over, you'd have to change the subject to like whatever was on the school lunch.
Yeah.
And the good thing about wrestling now, though, it is so much more widely accepted, and you can than it was then. And but you can be proud to be a wrestling fan now, whereas then you kind of had to keep it to yourself.
Kind of. I agree in the sense that it's more than it was, but believe it or not, when I was in school, it's so funny because I say this all the time. It shows like Monday Night Raw, they get so many views, but a lot of people like that were like in school with me, they never claimed to watch it. And then I did one day. I remember so distinctly. I was in the library with my friends, and I set up my phone because I had finished my homework, and I set up my phone and I started watching Raw from the night before. And I will never forget the look of shock that came over these people's faces. These were like my best friends, and they were like, "What are you watching?" And then they're like, that's not something people watch. That's one of those stupid sports, this and that."
Wow.
I got into a big argument in the middle of the high school library with my best friends because I was like, I remember just being so offended. I was like, "I love this. Don't talk trash about it." Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
geez.
it's accepted more because I would definitely see random kids walking around in like a Seth Rollins t-shirt. But at the same time, when you claim to be a wrestling fan, they're like, "Oh, you're one of those."
Right.
Which so much.
Well, I just turned 40 myself, and so I was in high school in the 90s at the peak of what would be considered the Attitude Era. So, I mean, it was not uncommon for every other person to have an Austin 316 NWO shirt. They were everywhere when I was in school. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I also remember as a kid, Hulk Hogan and the Red and Yellow and the Macho Man and the Ultimate Warrior, all those. And then, of course, a little further south, you saw like the Four Horsemen and those symbols. That stuff was everywhere. So that's one thing I am glad about. I mean, obviously, you can see what I'm wearing right now. I am glad about merchandise because it's always nice going somewhere and somebody recognizes, oh, that's whoever, or they say, oh, did you watch the event this weekend, or what'd you think about SmackDown or Collision or whatever. I like that kind of unwritten bond that wrestling fans have when you see the merch in the wild.
For sure. That's super cool. And I think even like when I started watching wrestling as like 11 or 12, when I first started going out places and I would see I saw a lot of Bullet Club shirts out, ironically, when I was out, because I fell in love with Bullet Club very early. I was an AJ Styles fan, and once I started going through his
Right.
history, I was like, oh, what's that? That's really cool. And then anytime I would go out as a preteen and see a Bullet Club shirt, I'd run up to this person and be like, "Oh my gosh, you know what this is? That's so cool." And they probably thought it was really weird because I was really young and talking to them about a Bullet Club shirt, but it made my day.
Well, as we wrap up tonight, I mean, you talked about your future, you talked about your plans. Where can our listeners on the podcast, and then our friends on YouTube, where can they find Sam Street? Where can you be found on social media?
Yeah, so on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram, I am at Real Sam Street. And I post.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I post all of my updates, the show posters, anything like that. So it's all in the same spot.
So as the BWC commissioner, I reserve the right to be the president of the Sam Street fan club, and I even have a good name for it, to be the Street Elite.
I thought about that. I thought about Street Fighters. I thought about, I know this one's copyrighted. I thought about using Sam's Club there for a while.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
With it. Still working on it. I
Got
think
some options there.
Right.
Yeah, Street Fighters is the leading fan name at the moment.
I like that.
I like that. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Merch to come, I promise.
Benny will write you a nice intro poem when the time comes.
Absolutely.
There we go.
That's what I do.
Well, Betty, before we let Sam go, final thoughts and question to you, anything?
I mean, like I said, I see Sam, many Sundays at BWC kicking people's butts. It was just so nice to actually chat with her. And, I just, having watched wrestling for so many years, I can't wait to see what the future holds for Sam.
Absolutely. I to the number of names and the talent that's gone through the BWC, to hear people, Sam, to hear them call you the star pupil, I think is a compliment that you can't put a weight or value to when you think about the talent that's come and gone through those doors.
Do they? I had no idea that was that was the reputation I had there. I had no idea. That's awesome, especially in a place like that with so much history. That's really cool. I had no idea.
Absolutely. And if you ever need to, maybe get a match in your favor, we might have an in with the commissioner here. What do you think, Benny?
There you go.
He's ready to go.
I'll keep that in mind.
Sam, thank you so much for talking to us. I look forward to seeing where the future holds. I mean, 20 years old and one of the bright young stars out there. Like we say, looking forward to wrestling's future, celebrating its storied past, which I'm sure many years from now we'll be talking about. Oh man, I remember having Sam on the podcast when she was, just young and up and coming. When you're headlining shows many years from now, when Betty and I are still talking smack about wrestling back and forth. So,
I hope so.
It should be a lot of fun. What was that?
She defeats Rhea Ripley for the women's championship.
That's a big one, but honestly, that's my dream match. So
I can see that.
Yeah.
I hope so.
I like it. Well, for Sam Street and the BWC Bright Shining Star, for the original Long Island Iced B, Benny Scala, I'm Dan Sebastiano. Thanks to our friends on YouTube, Monty and the Pharaoh. You can listen to us anywhere podcasts can be found. We're Dan and Benny in the Ring, and we will see you next time we're in the ring.